Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 8 p.m. in Vancouver, North America, and close to 1 a.m. in Brazil, Latin America, and 12 p.m. noon in mainland China. We have participants today from 4 different continents. Welcome to our last sports law seminar before the Asian Games. The Asian Games, we will all look forward to it, will definitely be spectacular, exciting, and colorful. It will be held on the 23rd of September in Hangzhou, which is the cultural hub of PRC. My topic today is on match fixing and anti-doping, right? These are the ethical issues facing world sports and Olympics. The world sports here, today I'm going to focus on football. Football, I'm sure all of you have enjoyed watching games since the World Cup. Once again, I would request you to switch off your microphone as it will cause interference when we make a presentation. So my topic is match fixing and anti-doping. I will touch on the ethical issues facing world sports and football, ethical issues such as match fixing, doping, corruption. Next, let's talk about sports law. Sports law is actually unique. It is neither English or common law or civil law. It is actually a fusion of two systems, the common law system and the civil law system. In fact, facts play a very important part in sports law. Facts at any given time account for 70%. Legal principles, case law, collectively responsible only for 30%. This is the unique system of sports law. In sports law, unlike other branches of civil law or common law, circumstantial evidence is admissible. And there is always, by default, applications of Swiss law. The next slide, we will talk on national courts. National courts are referred to the country court of any system in any country. As a rule, national courts do not interfere or disrupt in any decision of a sports tribunal, whether it is IAAF, World Athletics, unless there is an element of criminality. Right now, I will say something about myself. I am a sports lawyer based in Vancouver. I'm on the disciplinary tribunal of World Athletics, or IAAF. I'm also on the tribunal of sports resolutions in UK, and also accredited arbitrator of International Court of Arbitration for Sports, known as CAS, based in Lausanne. We are doing this together with my other panelists, arising out of our promotions, our interests on sports law. There is no commercial elements whatsoever in all our seminar. And this is our last seminar before the Asian Games to be held on the 23rd of September onwards in 2023. Next, we talk about CAS. Now, CAS is based in Lausanne. I am an accredited arbitrator with CAS. In fact, all Olympic sports federations, national sports federations, international sports federation, Olympic and non-Olympic sports do consent to the exclusive jurisdictions of CAS, the Court of Arbitration for Sports. Well, it is structured just like a commercial court. You have ordinary arbitrations, then you have appeal, then you have appellate divisions. So that is the structure of CAS, which is based in Lausanne, Switzerland. Next, we will talk about Swiss law. At any given time, international sport arbitration regulated by Swiss private international statute known as PILS. An arbitration at any given time is considered international as long as one of the parties is not ordinarily resident or domiciled in Switzerland at the conclusion of the arbitration's agreement. So material time is at the conclusion of the arbitration's agreement. Next, we will talk about the scale of match fixing and corruption. It is cancerous. It is always considered as a danger, and is always considered as a cancer to the essence of sports. Why? Such problems would definitely affect the integrity of sports, and therefore speculated by those who wish to cheat on the betting market. At any given time, soccer, cricket, and racing are the most corrupt games. Just to let you know, the figure for soccer in Europe in any given time, the illegal revenue arising from soccer in Europe is close to 0.5 trillion. Next, we talk about the scales of the problem. I mentioned that before. Illegal betting, and whether it's illegal, legal betting is an important source of revenue for national government. But illegal betting has a lot to do with organized crime and money laundering operations. I mentioned earlier the illegal revenue from football just in any calendar year in Europe is close to 0.5 US trillion. This is a staggering figure, isn't it? Next, please. But we have to do something about sports corruption, isn't it? We have to bear in mind the financial and social costs of sports corruption. At any given time, severe punishment is usually the standard. It has to raise the proportionality between wrong and the degree of punishment. And in many cases, severe penalties include life exclusions in any sports participations, in that particular game. Life exclusions. Next, we talk about sports fixing. Sports fixing is quite rampant in soccer. It's usually just one athlete. For example, would the athlete miss a penalty kick? Or how many yellow cards will be given within the first half an hour of the game? Or a particular swordsman, how many times will he be floored? Now, the purpose of sports fixing is to produce a determined outcome in a specific part of the sport, whether it's in cricket or in soccer or in tennis or in racing. Next, we talk about circumstantial evidence. The next slide. In commercial arbitration, in maritime arbitration, or in any arbitrations in common law countries in England, circumstantial evidence is definitely not admissible. However, in sports law, it is impossible to convict anyone based on direct evidence. Circumstantial evidence is therefore admissible in sports law cases. In fact, at the Beijing Olympic, telephone incident at the Beijing Summer Olympics arising from a case which I was asked to adjudicate and advise. There was a national representative surrounded by numerous national representatives from one particular continent, and that national representative was making numerous telephone calls when he was in Beijing during the Beijing Summer Olympics. I was given this case to investigate, to adjudicate, arising from a complaint from the national presidents of a Western country. I investigated. This case involved someone in Europe. I just asked him one question. Why did you make so many telephone calls when you were in Beijing? He said, I make the telephone call to my mother. My next question, if that is the case, could you produce the telephone bills? Nowadays, I'm sure all of you will have telephone bills at the end of each month, right? He said, no, I could not produce. Then I said, why not? His answer was this, because I make a telephone call to my mother. Then I asked, where did your mother receive the telephone call? He said, my mother received a telephone call in a public telephone in Western Europe. My next question, how old is your mother? And he said, my mother is 81 years old. My conclusion, based on circumstantial evidence, this person is guilty. Next, please. Now, the Olympic movement has the same stance in combating corruption in sports. The then president of IOC had this to say in 2011. It leads to manipulations of competitions and therefore threaten the integrity of sport. Cheating driven by betting is the biggest serious threat to sport after doping. This is what the president said in 2011. Next, we talk about IOC and sports integrity. You know, the International Olympic Committee actually had established anti-corruption unit to tackle ethical issues with an emphasis on education and risk prevention. The IOC actually had serious discussions and MOU with Interpol, International Police, to promote sports integrity following the 2013 Winter Olympic Games. In fact, such units have been established in some countries. Next, please. Now, this is quotations from a prominent English sports barrister, Adam Lewis KC, on his sports law and practice. That's what he has to say. The essence of sporting is what? It's based on a contest on a level playing field. Illicit drug taking strikes at the very heart of that spectacle. Outcome depends on unnatural performance. The word is unnatural performance. And sometimes consumptions of illicit drugs actually present very serious health hazards to the national athletes. In fact, can be life-threatening, can actually affect the athletes' reproductive processes as well. This is a quotation from Sports Law and Practice on the first edition. The next slide, we talk about anti-doping in sports and the regulatory framework. There is a World Anti-Doping Code. This is a framework formulated in 2004. It harmonized the list of prohibited substances and methods, updated on a yearly basis. There's a uniform set of anti-doping rules, violations, and standardized sanctioning, and mandatory standards for sample collections and analysis. Sample collections, usually blood samples, urine samples, and in racing and in equestrians, horse jumping, then the sample collections involve the horses as well. And WADA is the agency set up to administer this World Anti-Doping Code of 2004. And the Court of Arbitration, CS, where I'm a arbitrator, is the ultimate arbiter for the interpretations and applications of this legal framework. Next, please. Why anti-doping in sports and regulatory framework is important? Firstly, we must understand the spirit of sports. What is the spirit of sports? One, ethics, fair play, integrity. It must be healthy. It must create a healthy physical and mental environment. There must be character building and education. We must have excellence in performance. In any games, whether you're watching the World Cups or the World Cup football matches or the World Cup cricket, there must be fun and enjoyment. There must be teamwork. There must, most important, respect of the rules and regulations, respect of the law governing that particular sports. Next, please. Fairness in doping policy. Years ago, a Canadian snowboarder that was during the Winter Olympic was disqualified after winning a gold medal in the 1998 Winter Olympics. He was tested positive for cannabis or marijuana. However, there was no agreement between the International Ski Federation that marijuana should be a banned substance, even though cannabis is a prohibited substance in IOC medical code. Now, the CIS overruled the decision of IOC to strip the snowboarder of his gold medal following an appeal by the Canadian Olympic Association, and I do endorse that this is a correct decision of CAS. Next, please. Now, in Australia, there was a recent doping incident. Let me give you the facts. The doctor, the owner, the coaches at a football club were actually sanctioned for bringing the game into disrepute by the National Football League and also the National Sports Anti-Doping Agency. The penalties imposed were heavy, fine of 2 million Australian dollars and suspensions of the coach for 12 months. Next, to talk about horse racing. This is something which is very close to my heart. Racing is a popular social activity in several common law jurisdictions, such as England, and it's also very popular in Hong Kong and Singapore too. But it is also one of the most corrupt games. As I said before, doping does involve injections of enhancement drugs into the horses. It is common in any race arising in Singapore or in England to have doping tests conducted on the horses before each game, involving the blood and the urine samples of the horses. So blood and urine of the horses, not the jockey, the animals. 19, please. Slide number 19. Now, WADA is established. It is a uniform structure of an Olympic movement to support establishment and implementations of measures in the fight against doping. Then any violations and any appeals must be made to CAS, Court Arbitration for Sport. But WADA could always conduct out of competitions testing. Testing can take place before competitions, during competitions, and after competition, coordinating research, promoting preventive and educational action, and harmonizing scientific and technical standard and procedure for analysis and equipment. Next, please. Now we talk about the doping testing at the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. It was the first Olympic Games to carry out routine inspection of dry blood spots, or DBS. Blood samples are placed on the test paper to see whether they contain prohibited substances. So the scientific methods of testing is getting to be more and more advanced. So is the teaching steps are also getting more advanced. Now, what I have to do with the Olympic Charter? The Olympic Charter is the next slide. This is enshrined in the Olympic Charter. It is a cardinal principle of the Olympic Charter. Very important that competition is among athletes. Competition must take place. There must be total respect for sports ethics and morality, level playing field. There must be equality and respect for the rule of law. That is very, very important. Now, with this, I have to say thank you so much this is our last presentations before the Asian Games. Now it is my great pleasure to call upon my good friend Alonso Diego, who is now in Brazil close to 1 a.m. midnight. Diego will speak to us about soccer, and he will also touch on the recent performance of his country at the World Cup.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Peter. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I know we have participants from all over the world today. It's a pleasure to be here. And before I start my presentation, I will just touch some points on the Brazilian performance this World Cup. Well, of course, as a Brazilian, we are all a little bit sad and disappointed. We were really looking forward to winning this World Cup, but you know what? That's sports. The best one won. Brazil could have done a better job, but Croatia did a better one. We have to admit. Hopefully for 2026, we're going to have a better team, a more mature team, better players, and a little bit more aggressive strikers. Let's see how it goes. For now, I can't wait to watch the final for the World Cup, Argentina versus France. I will not tell you guys which one I'm rooting for, but it will be an amazing game, I am sure. I'm sure also that everybody here is looking forward to this final match. Now let's get to my presentation. All right, I'm going to talk about soccer in Brazil. You're going to see a lot of things that Professor Koch just talked about because my presentation is about match fixing and corruption in soccer in Brazil. Let's start with the introduction. Well, according to FIFA, 270 million people are directly involved in soccer in their daily lives. This is either by being players, coaches, referees, etc. In Brazil, soccer is not only a favorite sport, but also part of the lifestyle. I'll start talking a little about soccer in Brazil so we can move with the irregularities, with the corruption that happens on it. Let's go for a brief history of soccer in Brazil. In Brazil, here soccer is everywhere. You see on the streets, you see in every field, you see at the beaches, people wearing favorite team uniforms and even companies named after Brazilian teams. It's literally a fever. The most accepted version is that soccer arrived in Brazil around 1894, brought by the British immigrant Charles William Miller. And just like in Europe, at first the sport was practiced mainly by elites. It was what they call a gentleman's sport. As the sport is cheap to be practiced and the rules are quite simple, it didn't take long for soccer fever to spread over Brazil and become the #1 sport in the country. In the 60s, players like Rivelino, Garrincha, and Pelé pushed the sport to the next level, gaining international authority. This period in soccer history generated the Brazilian term, the art of soccer, where Brazilian players were described as playing in such a better level than their opponents that it was considered a form of art. In the 70s and 80s also were strong decades for the Brazilian soccer. The country pushed forward its fame, gaining notoriety and winning many World Cups. The popularity just gained more traction over the decades. Nowadays, the country is known for its players and the passion for the sport. Brazil is considered the best, even though we're out of the World Cup. Let's talk about the Brazilians World Cups, what we brought home. The Brazilian soccer team so far has brought 5 World Cups. We are the country with most World Cup winnings. In 1958 was the first one. Brazil brought home their first World Cup. The World Cup was hosted by Sweden, and Brazil won the cup with 5 goals against 2 against the hosting country, Sweden. In 1962, Brazil won the World Cup held in Chile, and Brazil played with basically the same team and formation from 1958. The country won the cup match against Czechoslovakia with 3 goals against 1. The next one was 1970, was a World Cup that changed the soccer world. Brazil became the first country to hold 3 World Cup titles and won the final match against Italy. The World Cup was marked by an amazing performance of the Brazilian team, and especially for the players like Pelé, who scored many goals over the cup. 1994, Brazil faced Italy again in the final match and won the game in the penalty shootouts after a very hard and disputed game. This would be the 4th time Brazil brings home the World Cup trophy. In 2002 was the year that Brazil won the cup for the latest time. The World Cup was held in Japan and South Korea, and the Brazilian soccer team won the final match against Germany, scoring 2 goals. Soccer in the Brazilian economy. Brazilian soccer generates roughly 20 billion US dollars for the Brazilian economy, comprehending 0.7% of the country's GDP alone. Just soccer brings 0.7% of the GDP. The sport is so popular that it's broadcasted in high-value TV time twice a week on national TV channels. As we say here, the country stops every Wednesday and Sunday, and the majority of the population dedicates a part of their week to watch the games almost like a ritual. While the economy may flourish with such enthusiasm for the sport, the interest from illegal agents also grows every year in Brazil, resulting in more cases of corruption and illegalities in the sport. Soccer and gambling. Let's talk about legal aspects. Sports gambling in Brazil has been permitted for a long time and just recently became a regulated activity. It was permitted, but now it's regulated, right? There are plans to simplify the law and with that make it easier for the soccer fan to proceed with all the gambling in the legal manner. The issue here is that gambling and soccer both have deep roots in Brazilian economy, in Brazilian culture. I will explain that. The tradition. Informal bets were always common in Brazil. This kind of gambling was very common inside the stadiums and the bars around it, and would commonly be characterized by small bets on the overall outcome of the game. The activity was organized by informal bookies who would collect the bets before the beginning of the match and then meet with the winners to distribute the prize. Brazil has a solid tradition in betting on a popular game called Jogo do Bicho, which is an informal game played according to the national lottery. This game is illegal according to Brazilian law, but no legal measures are taken against the gamblers, and it usually generates just small profits. But the tradition of the gambling persists. Nowadays, gambling websites completely dominate the bet scenario in Brazil, and they operate in a gray zone, which is risky and grants more space for illegal activities to flourish. The moral aspect of it versus the legal aspects. As I've stated before, gambling is an activity perfectly accepted in Brazilian culture. It dates back for years and was brought into the country by influence of immigration and colonization. As mentioned before, there's a big size of the market that stands in the informality until the present days, making it harder to investigate and even prosecute eventual crimes. The problem starts when gambling and betting started to become regulated in Brazil, where, according to Brazilian law, it is necessary for all the agents and potential gamblers to be regularly identified and all the profits to be formally declared. Unfortunately, this rule is not followed by the majority of the gamblers. Here's where the illegality of the activity is backed up by the perception, even though it's a false perception, from the population that the referred act is perfectly moral and legal, which is not legal. It doesn't look like a major issue here, but I will bring some scenarios so we can all understand the complexity of the problem. Match fixing and corruption, what we call mala branca versus mala preta. As you can see, the problem with corruption and match fixing, specifically in Brazil, is huge. In fact, the problem is so intrinsic to society that the people here created popular terms, which is mala branca and mala preta. Let's start with mala preta. Mala preta stands in Portuguese for black suitcase. It's a popular term used informally to describe the act of match fixing in sports. This is your common match fixing as seen in other countries. The players, coaches, or any individual involved in the match are paid to underperform or give the advantage to the other team in the field. The term gained popularity in the 50s and is commonly used in Brazilian soccer, and it refers to the illegal payments that back in the day were made in a black suitcase that they left inside the locker rooms. Mala branca. Mala branca, or white suitcase, which is the opposite, is a little bit more complex. This term was created in opposition to the term mala preta, and it's used to describe the situation where the players, coaches, or any individual involved in the match are paid to overperform or act in a more efficient way. This is a complex issue here because it goes beyond the field of legality and it's perceived as a completely regular act by the population because the person is overperforming. The term has such a notoriety that even the famous Pelé, the king of soccer, admitted in the past receiving mala branca from investors and businessmen. For many, mala branca would not violate any of the principles of the sport, as it would merely be a bonus or an additional compensation to the players. The illegal activity here is disguised as an incentive to the players, making it more acceptable to the fans. It's a complex issue because it deals with the most basic principle of the sport, which is that the players must perform to their best in all matches without any exterior influence, and receiving incentives to better perform would contribute to a commodification of the sport. Soccer is meant to be played in a fair match without any involvement or incentive from outside. The only incentives that the players should have in mind is to do their absolutely best in the match and bring home the victory. Let's talk now some notorious cases of match fixing and corruption that happened here in Brazil. Case number one is Ivens Mendes and CONAF. In 1997, Ivens Mendes, who was the president of CONAF, the National Commission of Referees in Brazil, appeared in a leaked recordings phone calls with Mário Celso Petraglia, president of Atlético, a Brazilian soccer team, and Alberto Dualib, president of Corinthians, one of Brazil's biggest soccer teams, negotiating values which were believed to be paid to him as a way to manipulate referees in soccer games. The phone calls were leaked in Jornal Nacional, which is the biggest news program in Brazil. Ivens Mendes discussed the possibility of selecting specific referees for different teams during the course of championships organized by CBF, the Brazilian Football Confederation. The scheme involved selling the result of the games and also financing political campaigns. One day after the leaked phone calls became public, Ivens resigned from his position in CONAF, saying that his family was suffering threats. Unfortunately, as the leaked phone calls were obtained by the media in an illegal manner, the evidences were not able to be considered and making it impossible for the involved to be prosecuted. On the administrative side, the Brazilian Court of Sports banned from any involvement with the Brazilian soccer and also blocked Mário Petraglia and Alberto Dualib from representing their soccer teams ever again. In the same decision, the court nullified the games which Fluminense and Bragantino, where events had involvement with the referees, making the referred soccer teams return to the A series. The case number 2 is what they call the whistle mafia. The call whistle mafia became public in September 2005 during the course of Brasileirão, which is the biggest soccer championship in Brazil. The mafia was a scheme focused on games and results manipulation to favor bets and spot bets placed in specific websites. The illegal scheme did not focus on any team, but their main objective was purely profiting from soccer manipulation. It involved a group of investors who would approach referees on specific soccer matches and offer them money in exchange for manipulating the game in their favor. The investors were all participating in bets on the games and would make major profits over the scheme. The referees, on the other hand, committed a crime for merely $10,000 each. The case was brought to the public attention when one of the Brazil's biggest magazines, Veja, published an article detailing the scheme. An investigation started with joint effort from the Brazilian Federal Police and the Special Division for Organized Crime. The operation resulted in the criminal prosecution of the referees Edilson Pereira and Paulo José da Melon for embezzlement, association to commit crimes, and misrepresentation. The criminal charges were dropped in 2007 and archived in 2009. But on the Supreme Court of Sport, the mafia was not so lucky. Both referees were banned for life from any involvement with soccer, and the court also nullified 11 games where the referees participated. The case marked Brazil, and it's remembered by all soccer fans until today. Some still think that the whole championship should be nullified, but it didn't happen because it was related to Copa Libertadores da América, which is the championship from all Latin America. So they could not nullify the Brazilian championship, otherwise they would harm the Latin American championship. So decided just to nullify 11 games, which is also an absurd. Let's talk about the case number 3, Cruzeiro. Cruzeiro is a big soccer club in Brazil. In fact, one of the biggest ones. And it's featured in the A series of the Brazilian Championship in almost all of its editions. In 2019, after winning the Brasileirão Cup twice in the previous years, the club was surprised by the TV report that demonstrated a series of frauds and schemes involving the soccer team and their directors. The documents exposed demonstrate the club participating in numerous illegal activities, such as negotiating salaries and contracts with underage soccer players, money laundering, and also association to fraud the Brazilian tax code. The TV report exposed at first the transaction where one investor would lend money to the soccer team and get paid back in shares of the club, which is not only illegal according to Brazilian law, but this conduct is also banned by FIFA. Another illegal conduct of the team was demonstrated by their director giving himself raises 3 times in the same year during his career and also granting bonuses for himself and others involved in the scheme. The case is still under investigation by the Brazilian Federal Police, the Special Division Against Corruption and Fraud of the Civil Police and the Supreme Court of Sport. Arrests and apprehensions are still occurring, and so far, the police gathered enough evidence to confirm that the team's high-level directors and president embezzled $10 million in their schemes so far. It is expected that the participants will be charged and jailed by the end of this year. Well, maybe not by the end of this year, but 2023, for corruption, money laundering, association to commit crimes, and embezzlement. The situation stained the soccer team's image in the sport, and it's a disappointment for many fans here in Brazil. Well, this was all for my presentation. Thank you all for watching. And now